Millions of people did the same thing that I did, done of an urge to create something good in response to something terrible. Millions of people created art, and from around the world, people needed to do the same kind of thing that I did with this. It's about sobering, lovingly remembering these men. September 11th, 2001, I was living in Colorado, in my favorite place I've ever lived anywhere, in this wonderful house up in the mountains. And I woke up to my clock radio, and the guy said a plane just flew into the World Trade Centers. At that time, it sounded like it was a small plane. But because I had lived in New York for the better part of 22 years, I got up, got out of bed, went downstairs, and turned on the TV. And then sat there, watched the second plane fly in, and sat there for the whole day watching this, shocked like everybody, shocked, stunned. And then it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon Colorado time when someone on TV said, "We think that more than 300 firefighters died today." And that's when I sobbed. That made it all real. I still think that sentence holds the whole day because it holds the terrible and it holds the good. The firefighters are the ones who ran into the buildings. They're not the only ones who ran into the buildings, but they ran in. They ran in to help. So that's the good. 12 days later, the New York Times printed a 2-page spread with all 343 pictures of the firefighters. And when I saw that, I said, oh, someday I can do something about this. And I folded it up and I put it away. And that's how it started. It was years before I said, oh, I'll paint them on burned blocks of wood. And it just sort of came to me whole like that. And that was 4 or 5 years later. Each painting is 4 inches by 6 inches on a burned block of Baltic birch. And Baltic birch is a very high-grade plywood with very thin layers. I did not realize beforehand that it was actually the perfect wood to use. It was just a wood that I used because its quality was so high. I actually had the images blown up to the size I wanted, and then I transferred the outlines of the images with carbon paper because I have enough time on this project. I didn't need to do that part. But even at that stage, I painted it upside down. I was carefully avoiding looking at the face right side up before I put in the basic shading and color and line. And then at the end of the first session, when I'd done that, I turned them over and it was like, oh, hello. And from then on, I painted them right side up. But I think that's a very important trick. And the reason for that is we all carry ideas about faces in our head, about proportion and balance and how they look. And so I didn't want my own ideas about faces to intrude on what the individual faces were. And it's much easier to capture the upside down thing because it sort of bypasses my brain that wants to impose my own idea of a face on it. Better Angels was very transformative to my work in ways I didn't imagine at the time. First thing is it actually made me a much better painter. I mean, I was using tiny little brushes, a double aught brush, 2 zeros. What changed most was how I see. When how I see changed, then how I painted changed. But that was very shocking to me, but that's what happened. But that's how I became a better painter. My first set of paintings, those first 93, I had them scanned, and if I blew them up anything over actual size, I started like putting my hands in front of my eyes because they were just didn't look any good. And I thought that was just the scanning thing. And then later on, as I painted them 10 at a time, I was mailing them back to my friend in Colorado who had done the original scans because I wanted them all done with the same. So I got those back like 200 paintings in or something, and I blew one of them up and I went, oh, what happened? It still looks okay. And I blew it up bigger, and I was like shocked. It didn't degrade in the way the initial ones had. And that was because of the complexity of the paint on the surface. But that's really what changed, and my brushwork changed. But I had to see it. I had to see that kind of complexity. So then when the project is done, how many hours of practice later? It's probably 3,000 to 4,000 hours worth of practice that I had. The work I'd been doing before Better Angels is not work that I wanted to pick up again 3 years later. I had also moved 2,000 miles from where I was living when I started the project. I did know that I wanted to deal with environmental issues. I resurrected an old project I had, which was an animal alphabet, just to start doing, because the only way I know to get where I want to go is by doing it. You have to do something, and then that'll lead you to the next thing. It doesn't work to think about it. I was doing some of these little animals as sketches, and then I decided that no, I wanted to just focus on endangered species. And when I realized, well, after doing it, was, oh, look, I'm doing portraits again. I never painted one face before I did Better Angels. That's not what I did. I'm apparently a portraitist, except now I'm painting animals, and now I'm painting animals that I've met, which I didn't get the opportunity to do with those firefighters. I did 93 of the paintings, which would have left 250. And I went in search of a fire organization to partner with because it was clear the project was way bigger than I could manage on my own. And I found something called the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, which is based in Maryland. They were created by an unfunded mandate from Congress to memorialize fallen firefighters and to support their families and co-workers in line-of-duty deaths and injuries. And I approached them. It took fully 6 months between my first approach and them coming back to me and saying, okay, we'll partner with you on that. And at that point, I started painting again. But then at that time, I also got better quality images, which made a difference in my painting. It was very hard to maintain consistency over the time. In fact, when I finally got them back in my possession after the tour, I repainted close to 80 of them. But I still use those original photos, which are like a driver's license photo. They're not necessarily a photo that the family likes or the person likes, and you're supposed to have a photo taken every time you get a promotion. But a lot of guys should have been in white hats, but their photos were in black hats. So they could have been years older. There's one I know who had white hair, but he has very black hair in his photo. But they still were their official photos in the FDNY at that time, which is why I used them as reference. These guys were all looking in the camera for their FDNY photos. And so they're looking at the viewer on the wall. There's a father and son. The father was the oldest active duty firefighter in the FDNY, and he never wanted to retire, but he was actually fairly close to mandatory retirement. And his son and namesake, following in his path. And Angelini Sr., he actually was off duty. He responded on his own, and he was there at ground level actually helping injured civilians out. And so he was there at ground level when the towers came down on him. And then the brothers, ironically, on the wall, the brothers are side by side because they're alphabetically the same. There's also 2 men whose brothers were policemen who died at 9/11. So there's a lot of that kind of family. And the stories, I post them one a day on the Facebook page. I post the painting along with the short story that I have written. And the story is anecdotal, so it's not he was born on December 17th. It's that he loved to go fishing and that he had 3 kids and a train set. The things that give you a feeling about the person kinds of stories. And for the most part, we don't have stories about them at the Trade Center because you had to survive to tell the story. There's very few of these guys that we actually know much stories about when they were in there doing their thing. Sometimes when I know that part of a story, I include it in these. Year after year, I appreciate being able to just read one of these a day because it just brings a human being, puts a personal to it. When the paintings were down in Clearwater, Florida, it was a fire convention. And I had a woman and her husband come, and they spent quite a lot of time in front of the wall. And then she came over. She said that she worked on the 70-something floor of the North Tower. This is not a particularly physically fit woman when I met her, but she started walking down with a friend, and somewhere around the 40th floor or something like that, she was sitting on the stairs. She was just, worn out, sitting with her friend. She was a good ways down, but not feeling all that hurried, I guess. And some young firefighter who was going up stopped and gave her his oxygen mask to take a few deep breaths out of. And that recharged her enough, and he encouraged her that she got up and she went down. And her friend decided to wait longer. Well, her friend never made it out of the building. And here's where I'm going to cry. This woman was looking at the wall. She said, I wish I knew which one he was. And, there's a lot of people that day who didn't know which firefighter it was. I personally like art that gets me in the gut first, and then I'm happy to be drawn in intellectually, and I appreciate art that has an emotional connection first. And that is what I wanted with this. They need to all be together. People have asked if I would sell one. No, no, no. The whole point is they are all together, because all together you get how many there are, and you get that physically in your gut. And then because they're only 4 by 6 inches, they're intimate. So you have to actually go close into the paintings to really see it. Then when you're there, I hope, and what seems to happen is you see all these different individuals, and you just go from one face to another to another. So I think that's the power of the piece.